I woke up on my 20th birthday to a silence so complete, it felt like death had visited our mansion overnight. The usual sounds were missing: no coffee brewing in the kitchen, no morning news from the television downstairs, no voices discussing the day ahead. My parents Margaret and Robert, along with my older sister Jessica, had vanished before dawn like conspirators fleeing a crime scene. They had secretly driven to the law office of Patterson and Associates to rewrite the family while planning to cut me out of everything I had believed would one day be mine. I discovered their betrayal through a voicemail accidentally left on our house phone, my mother's voice coldly discussing my unworthiness. Instead of crumbling into tears or rage, I walked to the kitchen, with steady steps made myself a cup of coffee with hands that refused to shake, and picked up my phone to dial my own attorney with one simple, devastating demand. The mansion felt like a mausoleum as I wandered through rooms that had witnessed 20 years of what I thought was family love. Every step on the hardwood floors echoed with hollow emptiness, creating an unsettling rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The morning light streaming through the tall windows seemed different somehow, as if even the sun knew something fundamental had changed in this house. I found myself drawn to my father's study, where the leather chair behind his massive oak desk sat empty. Papers were scattered across the surface in a way that contradicted his usual meticulous organization. Legal documents bearing the letterhead of Patterson and Associates lay open, their contents revealing the preliminary paperwork for will modification. The sight of my name crossed out in red ink felt like watching my own obituary being written. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica that made my stomach clench. The message read simply, "Don't wait up. Family business to handle." The casual cruelty of those words, the way she wrote about excluding me from family matters, as if I were a tenant rather than a son and brother, cut deeper than any shouting match could have. The phrase "family business" stung with particular venom because it implied I was no longer considered family at all. Standing in that study surrounded by the scent of old leather and expensive cologne that always reminded me of my father, I began to remember conversations that had taken place in this very room. My grandfather William had spent countless hours here with me, teaching me about real estate investments, showing me how to read property deeds, and explaining the intricacies of business strategy. Those memories felt different now, weighted with significance I had never understood at the time. Something nagged at my consciousness, a half-remembered detail about a conversation my grandfather and I had shared just months before his death. He had been sitting in that same leather chair, his weathered hands holding a small, brass key, when he told me about the importance of keeping important documents in secure places. At the time, I thought he was simply sharing general wisdom about organization and responsibility. Now, with suspicion growing like a cold knot in my chest, I began searching the study with new purpose. Behind the volumes of law books and business journals, I discovered a section of the built-in bookshelf that moved slightly when pressed. The hidden compartment revealed itself with a soft click, and inside lay the same brass key my grandfather had shown me months earlier. The drive to First National Bank felt surreal, as if I were moving through someone else's life. The safety deposit box key felt heavy in my palm, warm from my nervous grip. The bank employee, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, with kind eyes and graying hair, led me to the vault with professional efficiency. When the box opened, I found myself staring at documents that would change everything I thought I knew about my family and my future. The property deed for our mansion, dated 2 years earlier, on my 18th birthday, listed my name as the sole owner. The house, worth $3.7 million, had been legally mine since I became an adult, transferred directly from my grandfather's estate without my parents' knowledge or involvement. My grandfather had executed this transfer through a private attorney, bypassing my parents completely. As I read through the legal documents with shaking hands, the full scope of my grandfather's foresight became clear. He had not only given me the house, but had also included a detailed letter explaining his reasoning. In his careful handwriting, he described his growing concerns about my father's financial judgment and my mother's materialistic tendencies. He had witnessed their increasing sense of entitlement toward his wealth and had decided to protect the family legacy by placing it directly in my hands. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My parents had been living in my house for 2 years, managing my property, making decisions about renovations and maintenance, all while believing they owned it. They had planned today's will modification under the assumption that they still controlled the family assets. Meanwhile, they had been essentially tenants in their own son's home, completely unaware of their true legal status. Standing in that bank vault holding documents that proved my ownership of millions of dollars in real estate, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication battled with sadness, anger wrestled with disappointment, and underneath it all was a growing sense of power that I had never experienced before. My family's betrayal had revealed their true character, but it had also uncovered my grandfather's ultimate gift. Not just financial security, but the tools I would need to demand justice. The drive home gave me time to process this new reality. My parents had not just planned to cut me out of an inheritance, they had planned to steal property that was already mine. Their secret meeting with the lawyer was not just family business, it was an attempted theft on a massive scale. The house they wanted to deny me was already legally mine for 2 years, and would continue to be mine regardless of what will they tried to create. As I pulled into the driveway of my own mansion, I realized that the balance of power in my family had shifted completely. The people who thought they were disinheriting me had actually been living off my charity without even knowing it. The irony would have been amusing if it were not so devastating to my understanding of the people who had raised me. The law office of Thomas Brennan occupied the top floor of a downtown building that had witnessed decades of family disputes and estate battles. Thomas had been my grandfather's attorney for over 30 years, a man whose reputation for integrity had survived countless attempts by desperate heirs to corrupt his professional standards. When I called him that morning, his secretary immediately cleared his schedule, understanding that emergencies involving the William estate required immediate attention. Thomas greeted me with the same warm handshake he had offered at my grandfather's funeral, but his expression carried a gravity that suggested he knew why I had come. His office walls displayed law degrees and professional recognitions, but what caught my attention was a framed photograph of my grandfather, taken at some legal celebration years earlier. Even in that old picture, my grandfather's eyes held the same calculating intelligence that had apparently seen through my parents' true nature long before I had. "Henry, I've been expecting this call for quite some time," Thomas said, as he gestured for me to sit in the chair across from his desk. "Your grandfather left specific instructions about what to do when your parents discovered the property transfer. He predicted they would attempt exactly what happened this morning." The confirmation that my grandfather had anticipated my family's betrayal felt like another layer of revelation. Thomas opened a file cabinet and withdrew a folder thick with documents, each page representing another aspect of my grandfather's careful planning. The property deed I had found was only the beginning of a much larger financial structure designed to protect me from the very people who should have been protecting me. "Your grandfather established a trust fund for you when you turned 18, Henry. According to the terms, your parents were designated as temporary managers until your 21st birthday, at which point full control would transfer to you automatically. The trust was funded with $500,000 intended to cover your education living expenses and provide a foundation for your adult financial independence." Thomas pulled out bank statements and transaction records that made my blood run cold. Over the past 2 years, my parents had systematically withdrawn money from my trust fund for personal expenses that had nothing to do with my education or welfare. Luxury vacations to Europe, designer clothing purchases, expensive restaurant bills, and payments toward Jessica's private art school tuition had drained nearly $400,000 from my account. They told you they were paying for Jessica's education out of their own savings. Thomas continued, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of a professional who had seen too many families destroy themselves through greed. In reality, they were using your money while preserving their own assets. They've been living off your inheritance while planning to deny you any inheritance at all. The documentation was thorough and damning. Credit card statements showed charges for items I had never seen, vacation photographs I had never been included in, and educational expenses for opportunities I had never been offered. My parents had created two separate financial lives, one funded by my money and one carefully preserved for their own future security. Thomas explained that my grandfather had built safeguards into the trust structure specifically to prevent this kind of abuse. Monthly reports were supposed to be filed with his law firm, documenting every withdrawal and its purpose. My parents had initially complied with this requirement, submitting legitimate expenses for my college preparation and living costs. However, over time, their reports had become increasingly vague, and their expenses increasingly questionable. Your grandfather suspected this might happen, which is why he arranged for the property transfer to occur separately from the trust fund. He wanted you to have assets they could not touch, resources they could not access, and legal standing they could not challenge. The house was his insurance policy against their greed. Armed with this information, I authorized Thomas to take immediate legal action. Eviction notices would be served to my parents and sister, giving them 72 hours to vacate my property. Additionally, Thomas would file criminal complaints for embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty, seeking full restitution of the stolen trust fund money, plus punitive damages. They're planning to present you with their new will as a fait accompli, Thomas warned. They expect you to accept their decision because they believe they hold all the power. They have no idea that their entire scheme is based on a false assumption about who actually owns what in this family. The drive home felt different this time, charged with anticipation and a growing sense of justice. My parents' cars were in the driveway when I arrived, which meant they had returned from their secret meeting with Patterson and Associates. They were probably inside right now, celebrating their successful manipulation of what they believed were their own assets, completely unaware that their celebration was about to become a disaster. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the house that had been legally mine for 2 years. Every mortgage payment my parents had made, every utility bill they had paid, every maintenance expense they had covered. All of it had been for my benefit, not theirs. They had been unwitting caretakers of my property while plotting to steal my future. The irony was almost overwhelming. In their attempt to disinherit me, they had revealed themselves as thieves who had been stealing from me for years. Their secret meeting to cut me out of the family fortune had led me to discover that I already controlled a fortune they never knew existed. Their betrayal had triggered their own downfall in a way that my grandfather had predicted and prepared for with remarkable foresight. As I walked toward the front door of my own house, carrying legal documents that would change everything, I realized that my 20th birthday had indeed marked a turning point in my life. But not in the way my parents had planned. The sound of laughter drifted from the living room as I entered my own house. My family's voices carrying a tone of celebration that made my stomach twist with disgust. They were toasting their successful betrayal with champagne, the expensive bottle I recognized as one my grandfather had been saving for a special occasion. The irony of them celebrating my disinheritance with wine that had belonged to the man who actually protected me felt like a deliberate insult to his memory. Margaret's voice rang out clearly as I approached the living room, her words dripping with satisfaction. "I'm so relieved we finally protected the family assets from irresponsible hands. Henry has always been too impulsive, too emotional to handle real money. William spoiled him terribly, with all those business conversations filling his head with ideas about running companies and managing properties. Robert's response came with the smugness of a man who believed he had just won a significant victory. The boy needed to learn that inheritance is earned, not given. Maybe now he'll appreciate what he's provided instead of expecting handouts just because he shares our last name. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for children is teach them that the world doesn't owe them anything. Jessica chimed in with a giggle that sounded cruel in the context of their conversation. Should we tell him tonight or wait until tomorrow? I almost feel bad about letting him have that birthday dinner we planned, knowing he'll be looking for his own apartment soon. Although, honestly, we're being generous by letting him stay here until he finds his own place. Their casual cruelty hit me like a physical blow. These people had raised me, claimed to love me, shared holidays and birthdays and family traditions with me, yet they could discuss destroying my future as if they were planning a dinner menu. The disconnect between the parents I thought I knew and the people speaking in that room felt like discovering I had been adopted by strangers who had spent 20 years lying about their true feelings. I stepped into the living room with the eviction notices in my hand, my presence immediately silencing their celebration. The legal documents felt heavy with significance, representing not just my ownership of the house, but my power to demand justice for years of deception and theft. "I have something for you," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotional storm raging inside my chest. "Consider it a birthday gift to myself." Margaret looked up from her champagne glass with the confident smile of someone who believed she controlled the situation. "Henry, darling, we need to have a serious conversation about your future. We've made some important decisions today that will benefit the whole family in the long run." Instead of responding to her condescending tone, I handed each of them their eviction notice. The room fell silent except for the rustling of legal paper as they read documents that shattered their assumptions about power and ownership in our family. I watched their faces change from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror as they realized the magnitude of their mistake. Robert was the first to explode, his face turning red with rage as he crumpled the eviction notice in his fist. "This is ridiculous. These documents are clearly forged." "You can't evict us from our own house, Henry. I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but it won't work. We'll sue you for harassment and fraud." Margaret's response was more calculated but equally vicious. "You manipulated your grandfather when he was dying, didn't you? You convinced a sick old man to sign papers he didn't understand. This is elder abuse, Henry. We could have you arrested for taking advantage of someone in a vulnerable state." Jessica's reaction was pure panic, her voice rising to a near shriek as the implications hit her. "You can't do this to me. I have school, I have friends, I have a life here. You're destroying my education, my future, everything I've worked for. How can you be so selfish?" Their accusations and threats bounced off me like raindrops on glass. After years of believing I was the lucky recipient of their generosity, discovering that they had been stealing from me while planning to destroy my future gave me a clarity I had never experienced before. Their anger only confirmed that they had never seen me as a son and brother, but as an obstacle to their financial ambitions. "The house has been mine for 2 years, I said calmly. "Grandfather transferred the deed on my 18th birthday. You've been living in my property while embezzling from my trust fund and planning to cut me out of an inheritance that was never yours to give or withhold." The room erupted in shouting as my family realized the full extent of their miscalculation. Robert threatened lawsuits he could never win. Margaret accused me of crimes she had actually committed, and Jessica demanded explanations for decisions that had been made to protect me from exactly the kind of betrayal I was experiencing. Then Jessica did something that shocked everyone in the room, including herself. She pulled out her phone and announced, "Maybe Henry should hear what you two have really been saying about him." The recording she played made my blood freeze. Robert's voice came through the phone speaker with crystal clarity. "If we plant some evidence in his room, make it look like he's been stealing from the business accounts, we could have him arrested. Once he has a criminal record, no court would ever side with him in a family dispute." Margaret's voice followed, equally chilling. "We need to be careful about the timing. If we do this right, we can frame him for theft, have him removed from the house, and complete the will change while he's dealing with criminal charges. By the time he gets out of jail, everything will be settled." Jessica's hands were shaking as she stopped the recording. "I've been documenting everything for months. I started recording when I realized how far you were willing to go. I never thought you would actually try to frame Henry for crimes he didn't commit." The revelation that my parents had been planning not just to disinherit me, but to frame me for felony theft felt like being struck by lightning. They had been willing to destroy my life completely, to send me to prison for crimes they had invented to permanently ruin my reputation and future prospects. The depth of their malice went far beyond simple greed into territory that felt genuinely evil. Standing in that living room, surrounded by people who had shared my name and my home while plotting my destruction, I realized that my grandfather had been right about more than just their financial irresponsibility. He had seen their moral corruption and had taken steps to protect me from dangers I could never have imagined. The property transfer had not just preserved my inheritance, it had given me the power to escape their attempts to frame me for their own crimes. The doorbell rang with perfect timing, cutting through the family chaos like a knife through silk. Through the window, I could see a familiar figure on the front porch. Uncle David, my father's younger brother, whom we hadn't spoken to in over 3 years due to some business dispute that had split the family. His presence felt like a gift from my grandfather's ghost, arriving at exactly the moment when I needed allies most. David entered the house carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who had been waiting years for this confrontation. The family feud had kept him away from holiday gatherings and birthday celebrations, but now I understood that his absence might have been protective rather than petty. He nodded to me with something approaching pride before turning his attention to my parents with undisguised contempt. "Hello, Robert. Margaret. Jessica," he said, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated grievances. "Thomas Brennan called me this morning. It seems you finally made the mistake I've been expecting for years." Robert's face darkened with old anger. "David, this is none of your business. This is a private family matter that doesn't concern you or your jealous vendetta against our success." "Our success?" David laughed bitterly. "You mean the success you built by stealing from your own father and planning to frame your own son? I've been documenting your crimes for longer than you realize." David opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with medical records, legal documents, and what appeared to be audio recording equipment. The sight of such thorough documentation made my parents visibly nervous, their earlier confidence evaporating as they realized how many enemies they had made through their greed and cruelty. "I want you to meet Elena Rodriguez," David said, gesturing toward a woman who had just entered through the front door. "She was your father's private nurse during his final months. Elena has some very interesting stories about the medical care Robert and Margaret provided for their dying father." Elena Rodriguez was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had witnessed too much suffering in her career. She looked directly at my parents as she spoke, her voice steady despite the gravity of her accusations. Mr. William needed daily medication for his heart condition. Dr. Chen prescribed pills that could have kept him alive for years longer, but Robert and Margaret refused to fill the prescriptions. They said the medicine was too expensive, even though their father had more than enough money to cover any medical costs. Margaret's face went white. "That's not true. We provided excellent care for my father-in-law. We spent thousands of dollars on his comfort and medical needs." Elena continued as if Margaret had not spoken. "They canceled 3 different doctor appointments in his final month, claiming he was too tired to travel. When I suggested calling an ambulance for emergency care during his last crisis, Margaret told me they preferred to let nature take its course, rather than prolonging his suffering with aggressive medical intervention." The implications of Elena's testimony hit me like a physical blow. My parents had not just stolen money and planned to frame me for crimes, they had actively hastened my grandfather's death by denying him medical care. They had essentially murdered him through deliberate neglect, believing they would inherit his wealth faster if he died sooner. David pulled out a recording device and placed it on the coffee table. Elena was smart enough to document everything. She recorded conversations, kept detailed medical logs, and photographed the medications that Robert and Margaret refused to provide. She tried to contact me at the time, but Robert threatened to report her to immigration authorities if she spoke to anyone about family medical matters. Elena is a United States citizen who has worked as a registered nurse for over 20 years, David continued. Robert's threats were not just cruel, they were based on racist assumptions and completely illegal. But his intimidation worked temporarily, keeping Elena silent until after William died. The recording David played made my stomach turn. Margaret's voice came through clearly. The sooner he goes, the sooner we can fix this family's finances. I'm tired of watching money get spent on someone who's going to die anyway. Henry doesn't need to know about any of this. He's too emotional to make practical decisions about end-of-life care. Robert's voice followed. We can't let sentiment interfere with good financial planning. If we can wrap this up quickly, we'll have resources to invest in Jessica's future and secure our own retirement. Sometimes you have to make hard choices for the good of the living. Jessica looked horrified as she listened to her parents discussing their grandfather's death as a financial opportunity. You killed him. You actually killed Grandpa to get his money faster. We didn't kill anyone, Robert protested, but his voice lacked conviction. We made difficult medical decisions based on his quality of life. He was suffering, and we chose not to prolong that suffering with expensive treatments that might not have worked anyway. Elena's response was swift and damning. Your father was not suffering when you denied him medication. He was weak, but his mind was clear and he wanted to live. He asked me repeatedly why his prescriptions were not being filled, why his doctor visits were being canceled. He knew what you were doing to him. David revealed that he'd been building a criminal case with the district attorney's office for months, waiting for the right moment to present his evidence. My parents' attempted will modification had provided the perfect opportunity to demonstrate their pattern of financial crimes and elder abuse. The DA's office is very interested in cases involving elder abuse and financial exploitation, David explained. When those crimes are combined with conspiracy to commit fraud and plans to frame innocent family members, they become federal matters. The FBI has been reviewing this case for the past week. As if summoned by David's words, we heard cars pulling into the driveway. Through the windows, I could see black vehicles with government license plates. Federal agents in dark suits were walking toward my front door, carrying briefcases and wearing the serious expressions of law enforcement officers executing planned arrests. The timing felt surreal, as if my grandfather's spirit was orchestrating events from beyond the grave. My parents had spent the morning planning my destruction, but they would end the day in federal custody. Their scheme to steal my inheritance had led them directly into a trap that had been years in the making. Robert and Margaret looked at each other with the dawning realization that they had no escape from the consequences of their choices. Jessica sat frozen on the couch, understanding that her family was about to be destroyed by their own greed and cruelty. Meanwhile, I stood in my own living room, surrounded by allies I had never known existed, watching justice finally arrive for crimes I'd never imagined. The FBI agents entered my house with the professional calm of people who had executed countless similar warrants. Special Agent Patricia Williams, a woman with graying hair and steel gray eyes, presented federal arrest warrants, while her colleagues positioned themselves strategically around the room. The transformation of my family's celebration into a crime scene felt surreal, like watching a movie about someone else's life. Attorney Thomas Brennan arrived simultaneously, carrying additional legal documents that would complete the destruction of my parents' assumptions about their financial status. His timing suggested careful coordination with law enforcement, indicating that this confrontation had been planned for much longer than I had realized. Henry, there's more you need to know about your inheritance, Thomas said, as he opened a file that dwarfed even the property deed I had discovered earlier. Your grandfather's estate planning was far more extensive than just the house and trust fund. The documents Thomas spread across the dining room table revealed the true scope of my grandfather's wealth and the extent of his efforts to protect it from my parents' greed. Beyond the mansion were $3.7 million. William had left me controlling interest in 7 commercial properties throughout the city, 2 manufacturing companies that employed over 400 people combined, and an investment portfolio valued at over $15 million. Your grandfather built a business empire over 40 years, Thomas explained, while FBI agents read my parents their rights in the background. He suspected Robert's true nature years ago and began restructuring his assets to bypass him completely. Every business decision, every property purchase, every investment choice was made with the intention of placing his legacy in your hands rather than Robert's. The manufacturing companies alone generated over $2 million in annual profit, while the commercial real estate provided steady rental income from dozens of business tenants. My grandfather had not just left me wealth, he had left me the tools to create more wealth and the responsibility to manage resources that affected hundreds of families through employment and business relationships. Thomas pulled out a thick letter written in my grandfather's careful handwriting, the pages yellowed with age but the ink still clear. The letter revealed that William had been testing Robert and Margaret for years, giving them opportunities to demonstrate integrity or greed. Every test had confirmed his worst fears about their character. Your grandfather knew about the trust fund embezzlement 6 months before his death, Thomas read aloud. He also knew about their plans to deny you inheritance and their discussions about framing you for financial crimes. He was too weak to confront them directly, but he was strong enough to ensure they would face justice after his death. The letter included specific details about conversations my grandfather had overheard, financial discrepancies he had discovered, and evidence he had gathered about my parents' systematic theft. He had been building a legal case against them even while they were accelerating his death through medical neglect, using his final months to protect me from dangers I could never have anticipated. William's business mentor taught him that the best revenge is massive success, Thomas continued. He structured your inheritance to ensure that Robert and Margaret would not just lose access to family wealth, but would watch you flourish with resources they had tried to steal. Every dollar they stole from your trust fund will be returned with interest and penalties. FBI agent Williams interrupted to explain the federal charges being filed against my parents. Robert faced 8 felony counts, including elder abuse embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted insurance fraud. Margaret faced 6 felony counts as his primary accomplice and co-conspirator. Both could receive prison sentences of up to 15 years if convicted on all charges. The evidence against them is overwhelming, Agent Williams explained. Financial records, medical documentation, audio recordings, and witness testimony provide multiple ways to prove each charge. The attempted framing conspiracy alone carries serious federal penalties. Jessica sat in stunned silence as she realized the full extent of her parents' crimes and her own precarious legal position. Her recordings of their conversations provided crucial evidence, but her knowledge of their financial crimes potentially made her an accessory to federal felonies. Thomas addressed Jessica's situation directly. You have a choice to make Jessica. You can face charges alongside your parents, or you can cooperate fully with federal prosecutors and potentially receive immunity in exchange for complete testimony about everything you witnessed. The offer represented Jessica's only chance to avoid prison, but accepting it would require her to testify against our parents in ways that would ensure their maximum sentences. She would have to choose between family loyalty and personal survival, between protecting the people who had raised her and protecting her own future. I'll testify, Jessica said quietly, tears streaming down her face. I'll tell them everything I know about the money, the medical neglect, the plans to frame Henry. I can't go to prison for crimes I tried to stop. Her decision triggered another revelation that stunned even the FBI agents. Jessica revealed that Robert and Margaret had hidden additional assets in offshore accounts, purchased real estate under false names, and established shell companies to launder money they had stolen from various sources over many years. My trust fund was just the most recent target in a pattern of financial crimes that stretched back over a decade. They have a house in the Cayman Islands that they bought with stolen money, Jessica confessed. They've been planning to flee there if their crimes were ever discovered. There's also a storage unit full of art and jewelry they claimed was lost in a burglary, but actually sold for cash. The scope of my parents' criminal enterprise shocked everyone in the room, including me. They'd been operating like professional criminals while maintaining the facade of respectable suburban parents. Their betrayal of me was just one element in a much larger pattern of theft, fraud, and deception that had touched multiple victims over many years. Agent Williams called for additional backup and evidence collection teams as the investigation expanded beyond my family's situation into what appeared to be organized financial crimes. My parents' attempts to steal my inheritance had led federal investigators to discover a criminal operation that involved multiple felonies and potentially millions of dollars in stolen assets. Standing in my dining room surrounded by FBI agents and legal documents, I realized that my 20th birthday had revealed truths about my family that were far more shocking than simple greed or inheritance disputes. The people who had raised me were career criminals who had seen me as their next victim rather than their son. My grandfather's protection had saved me from more than financial loss. It had saved me from becoming the target of people who were willing to commit any crime to get what they wanted. 3 days after my parents' arrest, the mansion felt different in ways that went beyond their physical absence. The house seemed lighter somehow, as if an oppressive weight had been lifted from its walls and rooms. FBI evidence collection teams had completed their work taking boxes of financial documents and electronic devices that contained evidence of crimes spanning more than a decade. I sat in my grandfather's study, now legally and officially my study, reviewing business reports from the companies I had inherited. The responsibility felt overwhelming at first, but Thomas Brennan had assured me that William had left detailed instructions and capable management teams to help with the transition. My grandfather had been preparing me for this role during our conversations, even though I had not understood the true purpose of his lessons at the time. Jessica knocked on the study door, her appearance dramatically changed from the confident young woman who had been celebrating my disinheritance just days earlier. She looked exhausted, frightened, and years older than her actual age. Her cooperation with federal investigators had been thorough and damning, providing prosecutors with enough evidence to pursue maximum sentences against our parents. "Henry, I need to apologize for everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew they were stealing from you, but I convinced myself it wasn't really theft because we were family. I knew they were planning to cut you out of the will, but I told myself you would be better off making your own way in the world." Her confession felt different from our parents' desperate denials and accusations. Jessica seemed genuinely horrified by the extent of their crimes and her own complicity in enabling their behavior. The recordings she had made revealed someone who had been increasingly uncomfortable with their parents' escalating schemes but had lacked the courage to stop them until it was almost too late. "The federal prosecutor offered me complete immunity in exchange for my testimony," Jessica continued. "But I want to do more than just avoid prison. I want to make things right with you, even if that means facing consequences for my part in what they did." I studied my sister's face, looking for signs of the manipulation and self-interest that had characterized our parents' behavior. Instead, I saw someone who appeared genuinely remorseful and desperate to rebuild her life on a foundation of honesty rather than crime. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "I want to repay my share of the stolen money through community service and legitimate work," Jessica said. "I want to finish school at a state university instead of the expensive private college they paid for with your money. I want to earn your forgiveness through actions, not just words." Her offer represented a chance for redemption that our parents had never sought and probably never would seek. Thomas Brennan had explained that federal prosecutors were satisfied with her cooperation and would not pursue charges if she continued providing testimony and maintained a clean legal record. The choice of whether to trust her again was entirely mine. "There's something else you should know," Jessica added. "Elena Rodriguez called me yesterday. She wants to thank you for giving her a voice in this case, but she also wants to continue working for our family if you'll have her." Elena had been remarkable throughout the investigation, providing testimony that was both damning to my parents and protective of my grandfather's memory. Her courage in documenting their medical neglect had ensured that William's death would not go unavenged, while her detailed records had provided crucial evidence for federal prosecutors. I arranged to meet Elena at the house the following day, expecting a brief conversation about her testimony and possible future employment. Instead, she arrived with a folder full of documents that revealed another layer of my grandfather's planning that even Thomas Brennan had not known about. "Mr. William gave me these papers 3 weeks before he died," Elena explained. "He told me to keep them safe and give them to you when you were ready to understand their importance. He said you would know when that time came." The documents outlined my grandfather's vision for the William Henry Foundation, a charitable organization focused on preventing elder abuse and supporting whistleblowers who exposed family financial crimes. He had already set aside $2 million to fund the foundation's initial operations, along with detailed plans for programs that would help other families facing situations similar to what I had experienced. "Your grandfather wanted his suffering to prevent other families from enduring the same betrayal," Elena said. "He believed that education and legal support could help elderly people protect themselves from their own children's greed." The foundation's mission statement, written in my grandfather's careful handwriting, brought tears to my eyes. He had transformed his personal tragedy into a tool for protecting other vulnerable seniors from the kind of family betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. Even in death, he was still teaching me about turning pain into purpose and using wealth for causes greater than personal satisfaction. I offered Elena the position of Foundation Operations Manager with a substantial salary increase and full benefits that reflected both her professional qualifications and her moral courage. Her acceptance marked the beginning of our work to build something meaningful from the ashes of my family's destruction. Jessica's cooperation with federal investigators revealed additional victims of our parents' crimes, leading to civil lawsuits and restitution orders that would strip them of every asset they had accumulated through theft and fraud. Their house in the Cayman Islands was seized, their hidden storage unit was emptied, and their bank accounts were frozen pending full investigation of their criminal enterprise. Uncle David became my business advisor, his years of conflict with Robert finally vindicated, as his suspicions about their financial crimes proved accurate. Together, we developed plans to expand the family businesses while maintaining their ethical standards and employee-focused policies that had made my grandfather proud. The mansion underwent extensive renovations to remove every trace of my parents' influence, while preserving my grandfather's memory through restored furniture and family photographs that celebrated his life rather than theirs. The study where he had taught me about business became the foundation headquarters, while his bedroom was converted into a meeting space for board discussions and strategic planning. 6 months after my 20th birthday, the William Henry Foundation had helped prosecute 12 cases of elder financial abuse and provided legal aid to 43 families fighting similar battles. Elena's leadership had attracted national attention to our mission, while Jessica's community service work had demonstrated genuine commitment to earning redemption through action rather than words. Standing in the foundation headquarters, that had once been my grandfather's study, surrounded by case files of families we had helped and business reports showing continued growth in companies I now controlled, I realized that my inheritance had been far more than money or property. William had left me the tools to build a life based on justice, integrity, and service to others who faced the same betrayals that had nearly destroyed me. 1 year after my 20th birthday, I stood in the same dining room where FBI agents had arrested my parents, but the space had been transformed into something my grandfather would have been proud to see. The William Henry Foundation's first annual gala was bringing together families we had helped, business leaders who supported our mission, and legal professionals who specialized in elder protection law. Robert had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to charges that included elder abuse embezzlement and conspiracy to commit fraud. Margaret received 6 years for her role as his primary accomplice and co-conspirator. Their convictions had sent shockwaves through their affluent social circle, destroying reputations they had spent decades building through deception and theft. The local newspaper had covered their sentencing with headlines that emphasized the betrayal of family trust and the courage of victims who spoke out against powerful abusers. Their story had become a cautionary tale about how greed could corrupt even the closest relationships, while my story had become an example of how justice could emerge from the darkest family betrayals. Jessica sat at one of the gala tables, wearing a simple dress that reflected her new commitment to living within honest means. She had completed her first year at the state university with excellent grades while working part-time jobs to pay her expenses. Her community service work with elderly abuse victims had evolved into a genuine passion for social work, leading her to change her major from art to gerontology. "Henry, I want you to know that I think about Grandpa every day," Jessica said during a quiet moment between speeches. "I understand now why he chose you to carry on his legacy. You've turned his death into something that helps other families avoid the same tragedy." Her transformation had been gradual but genuine, marked by consistent actions rather than dramatic promises. She had testified against our parents with painful honesty, provided investigators with evidence that ensured maximum sentences, and dedicated herself to making amends through service to others. While our relationship would never return to childhood innocence, it had developed into something based on mutual respect rather than blind family loyalty. Elena Rodriguez had become far more than an employee. She had evolved into a trusted advisor whose insights about family dynamics and elder care had shaped the Foundation's approach to prevention and intervention. Her courage in documenting our grandfather's medical neglect had not only brought our parents to justice, but had also provided the Foundation with credibility among healthcare professionals and legal advocates. "The families we help always ask how you found the strength to fight back," Elena told me, as we watched gala attendees networking and sharing their stories. "I tell them that your grandfather gave you more than money. He gave you the understanding that wealth means nothing without the courage to demand justice. Uncle David had proven invaluable as both business advisor and family elder, helping me navigate the complexities of managing multiple companies while maintaining the ethical standards that had guided my grandfather's success." The businesses had not only maintained their profitability under my ownership, but had also expanded their employee benefits and community involvement programs. Thomas Brennan remained my primary attorney, but he had also become something like a second grandfather, sharing wisdom about family legacy and responsibility that complemented the business lessons William had taught me. His guidance had helped me understand that inheritance was not just about receiving wealth, but about earning the right to control resources that affected other people's lives. The Foundation's work had expanded beyond our local community to include partnerships with national organizations fighting elder abuse and financial exploitation. Our success had attracted attention from congressional representatives who were drafting federal legislation to strengthen protections for vulnerable seniors, while our educational programs had been adopted by social service agencies in 12 states. Standing before the gala audience preparing to deliver my annual report on the Foundation's accomplishments, I reflected on the lessons my 20th birthday had taught me about family loyalty and justice. The people who had raised me had revealed themselves as criminals willing to commit any crime to satisfy their greed, but their betrayal had also revealed allies I had never known existed and resources I had never imagined possessing. My grandfather once told me that real wealth comes from surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your success rather than resent it, I said to the assembled guests. This past year has taught me that family is not defined by blood relationships, but by the people who stand with you when faced with impossible choices between right and wrong. The audience included elderly abuse survivors who had found justice through our legal support family members who had learned to recognize warning signs of financial exploitation, and legal professionals who had expanded their practices to include elder protection services. Their presence represented the transformation of personal tragedy into community healing. We cannot prevent every family betrayal or stop every act of elder abuse, I continued, but we can ensure that victims have resources to fight back, that criminals face consequences for their choices, and that future generations learn to value integrity over convenience. As I concluded my speech, I looked around the dining room that had witnessed so much pain and transformation over the past year. The table where FBI agents had spread evidence of my parents' crimes now held awards recognizing the Foundation's work and photographs of families we had helped find justice. The space had been redeemed through service to others who had faced similar betrayals. The evening concluded with a toast to my grandfather's memory and to the principle that justice delayed is not justice denied when good people have the courage to demand accountability from those who abuse their trust. The guests raised their glasses in a dining room that had been transformed from a crime scene into a symbol of hope for families fighting their own battles against greed and betrayal. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the catering staff had finished cleaning, I sat alone in my grandfather's study with a cup of coffee and the satisfaction that comes from turning personal pain into public service. The house felt peaceful in ways it had never felt during my childhood, as if the truth had finally freed it from the weight of lies and deception that had infected its rooms for years. I opened the desk drawer where I kept my grandfather's letter, reading his words again, as I had done countless times over the past year. His wisdom about family loyalty and responsibility had guided every major decision I had made since discovering my parents' betrayal, helping me build a life based on the values he had tried to teach me during our conversations. My 20th birthday had marked not just my transition to adulthood, but my education about the difference between people who love you for who you are and people who see you as an obstacle to what they want. The painful lesson had taught me to value integrity over comfort, justice over false peace, and earned loyalty over inherited obligation. As I prepared to turn off the lights and head upstairs to bed, I realized that the house no longer felt like the place where I discovered family betrayal. It had become the headquarters of an organization dedicated to preventing other families from experiencing the same devastating loss of trust and security that had nearly destroyed me. My grandfather's greatest gift had not been the millions of dollars or the valuable property he had left me. His greatest gift had been the wisdom to recognize that true wealth comes from using your resources to protect people who cannot protect themselves, and that the best revenge against those who try to destroy you is building something beautiful from the ashes of their cruelty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the Foundation expanded its mission and new families sought our help in fighting their own battles against greed and betrayal. But tonight I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that justice had been served, that good people had been protected, and that my grandfather's legacy lived on through work that gave meaning to wealth and purpose to power. What would you do if you discovered that the people closest to you had been planning your destruction while living off your generosity? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and personal justice? When the two seemed impossible to reconcile, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this story if it resonated with your own experiences of family betrayal or personal triumph. Thank you for joining me on this journey from devastating betrayal to meaningful justice. I hope my story reminds you that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the most painful losses, and that courage to demand accountability from those we love can lead to freedoms we never knew we needed. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding strength in unexpected places. And please share this story with anyone who might need to hear that justice is possible, even when it comes from the people who should have protected us most.